Hello everybody, we are Brigade of Beans, a diagnosed dissociative identity disorder system. My name is Atlas, and today I wanted to have a bit more of a chatty, rambly video about being disabled. We were watching a new video from Pixie the other day, and they were talking about how they sometimes struggle to use the term disabled when referring to themselves. And it got me thinking about our journey of using the term disabled and accepting that we're disabled, because we didn't grow up knowing we were disabled despite being disabled the entire time. We have multiple disabilities. Our primary disabilities are dissociative identity disorder and autism spectrum disorder, but we also have ADHD, Tourette's, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I will say that for some people, they do not perceive themselves as having a disability when they have c-PTSD or DID. But for us as an individual, they are definitely really disabling, and they impact our everyday functioning. And that also took a long time for us to recognize and accept, because part of DID is the amnesia, and for us as well, the rejection of that this is happening, that this is reality, just rejecting the idea that this actually happened to us and this is actually happening to us. And so it was really hard to grapple with the fact we were disabled when we didn't really connect with our actual life that was taking place. I'm not sure if that quite made sense, but what I'm trying to say is, because of our dissociation, we were really disconnected from what we were actually experiencing, and anything that was outside of our window of tolerance, anything that was distressing, we were forgetting or we weren't connecting with fully, and we weren't realizing how much it was actually impacting us. We were diagnosed with DID and c-PTSD when we were, I think we were 19, and then we were diagnosed with autism and ADHD. I think we were like 21 turning 22-ish, that kind of time period. Which meant that we grew up and we experienced life thinking that all the challenges that we had, all the things that we struggled with, was the normal amount that someone struggled with something. We thought it was normal for people to feel really disconnected from their own lives. We thought it was typical for people to feel as if they were in a dream or that reality wasn't real. We thought that it was normal to have really graphic and distressing intrusive thoughts. We also thought that it was normal to have distressing and upsetting nightmares, that we just called them dreams, and we just said that we had vivid dreams and that we didn't have nightmares, because we didn't perceive that being any more distressing than our normal dreams, because all of our dreams were like that, so they just must be dreams. But no, in fact, we were just having intense nightmares every single night. When we first started having tics, and I think it was 2017, my timeline might be a bit wrong there, we thought that we were intentionally faking, and then even though we tried to stop ourselves, it just never worked. And we thought that we were copying the other kid in our grade who had Tourette's, and so we didn't want to talk to people about it because we thought that we were just doing it for attention, despite the fact that we tried to stop so often, over and over again, and it just wouldn't stop. But because we were more likely to tick in specific situations than others, we'd go home and we wouldn't tick as much as when we were at school, and we're like, damn, we must just be doing this to pretend in front of our friends. We didn't realize that it's pretty typical for people to have different tics based on the environment they're in and based on the emotions that they're feeling. And so for us, when we were at school and we were around our friends and we were excited and we were happy, it caused us to have more tics, because excitement and enjoyment and being in loud, crowded spaces where there's a lot of noise causes us to tick more. Meanwhile, when we're at home and by ourselves in our room, or just around a few family members who aren't all that loud and who it's not all that chaotic, we just wouldn't tick as much. And we'd still tick, but we'd just brush it off, or we'd forget. Like, one of our most common tics that we have is a popping sound, and we didn't have this at the time, but we do now, and we don't realize every single time that we do it, because it's just so ingrained as to how our body moves. We don't think about it much more than you'd think about blinking, because although it makes a sound, it's just a part of our everyday life. So when these experiences are inherent to the way that you navigate the world, you don't realize that other people have it differently, especially if no one explains it to you. And so we didn't realize we were disabled, and we didn't really start grasping the term of disability until, I think, 2022, which is when we got on the disability support pension. And the disability support pension was hard for us to grapple that we needed, because there'd be points in time where we could work fairly well, where we'd be able to show up to our shifts, where we'd be able to participate. But then there were other shifts where we just really struggled to do our job. Like, a lot of our jobs include cleaning. And as much as we try to get something clean, it's never as clean as other people want it to be. And I genuinely don't know what we do wrong, but we can never get it as clean as other people, despite how hard we try. It just doesn't work. Part of that we've realized is because we dissociate, because the actual sensory experience of cleaning things, the smell of like the cleaning products, the feeling of water on our hands, is really overwhelming for us in an autistic sense. And so we dissociate when we're cleaning, and so we're not fully there, and so we're not able to clean it properly because we're not actually paying attention to what we're doing. Because if we're paying attention to what we're doing, we'll end up in sensory overwhelm and either end up in an autistic shutdown or an autistic meltdown, neither of which is very cohesive to working a job. So we'd just dissociate and then not do our job well, and then get in trouble, or then be reprimanded, and then we'd be really upset and started crying at multiple different workplaces because we couldn't understand what we were doing wrong, because we were trying our hardest and we were told that we weren't, that we were being lazy, that we were just pretending to try and work. And we weren't. We were genuinely trying as hard as we physically could, and we just couldn't perform to the standard that was required from us. And then we lost several jobs for different reasons. We ended up having mental health crises. We ended up just like no-showing shifts at jobs because either we were in a crisis and then were unable to contact our workplace because we thought that we wouldn't be here to face the consequences, or we didn't realize that we'd skipped shifts. Like, we lost our last job because I didn't realize that we just hadn't shown up for work because another alter had fronted and I had blackout amnesia. But because we'd always showed up for work, I just assumed that we'd gone to work, but we hadn't. And so then I lost that job because I just no-showed a shift. And then it took me several days to reach out to my boss, which also contributed to me losing the job, to explain the situation, because I had such intense anxiety and such intense fear about what that interaction would look like that I couldn't make myself do it. I couldn't find the words to put into the text to explain that I hadn't intentionally just no-shown. I'd had like a health episode, and I just couldn't find the words to do it until it was too late. And it was and when I messaged, it was just too late. But then at other times, I'd be able to do the job fine. When we are able to live semi-independently, although our house is often a mess, there's often chores undone, like there's often stuff that we can't do, like we can't clean our own house properly because, again, we can't handle the smell of the cleaning products or the feeling of water on our hands when we're doing dishes. We struggle to shower because of the sensory aspect, but also because of trauma elements. And so we might only shower like once a week, which isn't the hygiene standards that you need, especially when you live in Australia and it's hot and it's sweaty, and we rely on baby wipes and deodorant because we just can't do something that's typical of like functioning. And we just, despite how hard we want to do it and how much we try, our body just doesn't let us. Or if we do it, we then put ourselves at risk of meltdowns and shutdowns, which then lead to us just being non-functional for the rest of the day, or heavily dissociated or heavily upset. And it just then doesn't feel worth it to try and push ourselves to shower when we know it means we can do nothing else in a day. So when we got on the disability support pension in 2022, it's the first time that we had disability associated formally with ourselves. Like, we already had our c-PTSD and our DID diagnosis, but we didn't conceptualize them as disabilities. They were just diagnoses. They were just mental health things. But then getting approved the disability support pension, it was like, oh, fuck. I am disabled. The government agrees that I'm disabled. What does this mean for me? And we had a little bit of an identity crisis around that, because it was so different from what we expected our life to be. Like, growing up, we were always like, no, I'm going to do high school. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to get my veterinary degree. And I'm going to become a vet. And then when we worked at a vet clinic in high school, we went, absolutely not. But I'm still going to go to university at the time. I was like, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to do my teaching degree. I'm going to become a secondary teacher. And then we graduated high school, and then we couldn't get student loans because we're not a citizen, but we are a permanent resident. So we had to wait 10 years to be able to get those student loans. So we just couldn't go to university. So we're like, it's fine. I'll work. I'll make savings. And then I already explained what work was like for us. And then, so finally, we were given the disability pension, which we could get as a New Zealand citizen living in Australia. That's a whole complicated other mess that I'm not going to go into. But we got approved the disability support pension, which meant that we were officially disabled. It was incredibly beneficial that we had other people who were disabled and on the disability support pension that we knew and could talk to during this time, because like it's a big thing to realize, or it's a big thing to like grapple with. This sudden, I don't really have words to describe it. I'm trying to, and I just keep talking myself in circles. But it's a big thing, and it's a difficult thing. The whole life that I had planned for myself suddenly shifted as I realized that I literally couldn't do everything that I wanted to do. I couldn't work full time. I couldn't study full time. I couldn't even really keep house. Like, there was so much stuff that I struggled with. And like, it was a really hard period of time that took, like, I'd argue a couple of years to realize that I'm disabled, and that doesn't negate my value. Something that really helped us was our YouTube channel, because it was something that we could do and we could put out and we felt like we're contributing. Because as much as people like to go, people on the pension or people on like government payments or whatever are just lazy and just want other people to do it for them. At least for myself, there's such a drive to contribute. Like, I want to be a part of community. I want to give something back. I want to participate. And realizing that I couldn't work or I couldn't study felt like that had been taken from me and that there was nothing I could do for anyone else. But our YouTube channel kind of helped with that, because we were making videos for other people to enjoy as well as ourselves. But we were giving something back. And although YouTube isn't a job for us, we don't get paid, like we make no money off of YouTube, it still gave us purpose. And that's why a lot of disabled people have hobbies or quite involved hobbies or get into crafting or something like that, is so that they can do something, because it's boring to just sit at home and not be able to do anything. Like, there are days where we are physically incapable of doing anything and all we can do is lay in bed with our eyes closed listening to an audiobook. And that sucks. That might sound relaxing, and yeah, it's maybe relaxing for the first half an hour, but then you want to do things. And it's not just you want to do things to have fun. You want to be able to get up and go to the bathroom so that your bladder doesn't feel like it's about to explode. You want to be able to go and get food so that you're not hungry, or get water so that you're not thirsty. You want to go and make sure that the cat's litter is clean and that their food is topped up and that their water's topped up. And you have to decide how you're going to spend your almost non-existent energy to get everyone in the house's needs met. And so most of the time for us, we prioritize our cats, obviously, because it's not their fault. And we have a system set up so that it's very low energy to be able to take care of our cats. Like, we have 2 litter trays, and one of them we will try and keep empty at all times, so that, like, if we're on a day where we just do not have the capacity to empty a litter tray and put new litter in, we can just put new litter into the empty litter tray. And so that really helps. And we have like their food bowl and their water bowl in the kitchen up on a table, so we don't have to bend down so low. Their food is right next to their bowl, so we just have to reach in and scoop it out. Like, they have their water bowl there. They also have a mug in the bathroom right next to the tap, because one of them refuses to drink out of a water bowl or a fountain and will only drink out of a mug. And so we do all these things to make it as less taxing on ourselves as possible, because they deserve the utmost care. But then once we do that, we then don't have any energy left. Then we have to wait another half hour, an hour, until we get the energy again to be able to go and get our own needs met. And like, it really sucks, because you don't want to be like that. And that's not our everyday, but it is pretty common. It happens like at least once a week, where we just have a day where we can't really do much. And that's not even to mention how dissociative identity disorder then complicates our other disorders. Like, there are alters within our system who are, like myself, who are pretty good at social stuff. Like, I'm not impacted by it all that much. But then we have other alters who incredibly are impacted on social ability. Either they just are uninterested in other people and don't want to engage. They can't talk, or they experience frequent verbal shutdowns. They're unable to make eye contact. They get terrified around other people and just fawn, which isn't actually very productive or helpful, because it can put us and them in vulnerable situations. We have alters in our system who hold really extreme flight responses, and they do not front very much, but there have been times where we have been out with our friends and literally just walked or run away from them. This happens very rarely, but it's still something that occurs and can be quite dangerous and really distressing, not just for ourselves, but also our friends who have to experience that. And luckily, as we've gained communication and we've gained awareness and we've been able to ground and create a safe space for ourselves, that has happened less and less and less. But that's still something that has occurred and has the potential to occur in the future. We have alters who have stronger sensory issues due to their autism, or we have different safe foods within the system. So we might buy a bunch of, say, a specific brand of muesli bars that is my safe food, and then I might not front for a week. And then someone else is fronting and they detest that food, and there's nothing in the house that they feel like they can eat. And because we're disabled and we're on the pension and we receive fuck all money and rent keeps going up and we don't actually have a lot of expendable cash, we can't just go out and buy a whole new grocery shop, because we can't go to the grocery store because, one, we can't drive, and two, the grocery store is so overwhelming we can't get there reliably or for a long enough time to be able to do a comprehensive shop. So we have to order food online, which means we need to spend at least $75 every single shop to be able to get it delivered. And it just means that we then end up with even less money because we have to spend a minimum amount, and it means that we can't just go and chop up a couple of extra things to our cart and get it delivered, because that's not how it works. And it just drives home the fact that we're not able to do stuff that everyday people can do. And it then makes us realize that actually we are disabled because someone would just be able to walk to the shops or drive to the shops, pick up a couple of things. And that's not something we can do. Likewise, there was just a cyclone where we live. Luckily, it basically dissipated before it actually hit where we live, and it's now just an ex-tropical cyclone. But everyone was preparing for it. A lot of people went to the shops to buy food, toilet paper, supplies, torches, batteries, power banks. People were getting sandbags and all of this stuff. And we had friends offer, do we need anything? And luckily we didn't, because of where we're located, and we did still have enough food from our shop mostly. But if we hadn't, we would not be independent enough to be able to go and get sandbags, to be able to go to the shops. Because if we can't handle the shops normally, we cannot handle the shops when there are a bunch of people trying to get emergency supplies. Like, we would end up having either a meltdown or a shutdown in the store. And the one time we've had a shutdown, no, I don't think it was a shutdown. We were having some kind of episode. I don't know if it was a dissociative episode, if it was an autistic thing, I don't know, in the supermarket, and we had to sit down because we were trying to ground ourselves. We got kicked out. We got kicked out because you're not allowed to sit on the floor in the supermarket, which makes sense. But also, that was the only thing we could try and do to ground ourselves. And then we got kicked out, which wasn't great. That actually really sucked. And then we went and hid in the bathrooms and just didn't move. Hi everybody, my name is Arka. Another thing that is disabling for us is the memory issues that arise with having both ADHD and dissociative identity disorder. So amnesia is really common for those with dissociative identity disorder. And for us, or for me personally, I have amnesia with a lot of the system. I'm in a subsystem with Atlas, which means that I only really have communication with him unless I'm fronting with someone else. So when someone else is out and doing things, I don't have any memory of it unless they pass it along to Atlas or tell Atlas what they were up to, and then he tells me. And so that means that I am very disconnected from a lot of what we do on a daily basis. It also means that I'm unable to remember anything related to trauma. And that might sound really beneficial, and it is. It keeps us alive, it keeps us safe. But it also means that I'm unable to recall specific triggers that we have. So alters like myself with no connection of trauma can accidentally end up triggering the system because we're unaware that we need to avoid certain topics or certain sensations and stuff like that. And that then leads to conflict internally because alters that are being triggered by that feel like they're being targeted or attacked by alters who are accidentally triggering them. And then because we forget about trauma and because the amnesia barriers exist to keep me separated from trauma, even when people's triggers are explained to me, I might still forget them unintentionally. Like, my job is a soother and a co-host, and my goal in the system is to help us as much as possible. But I still sometimes trigger people on accident because I forget or I don't know their triggers, or our triggers, I guess. Speaking of triggers, I don't think we've talked about c-PTSD yet, but that is incredibly disabling. We have nightmares most nights. I don't remember them. Atlas remembers some of them. Other people in the system remember more. And it's really distressing. It means we often start our day already in a state of distress, already upset. We need to start our day by grounding and self-soothing, and we can't just get up and do things because we are scared. We might be in some kind of active trauma response. We might even be in flashback. And so that already just starts the day off a foot backwards and just feeling horrible. And it impacts us every single day. Like, we have improved our sleep quality and decreased the intensity of our nightmares a lot by no longer sleeping in a typical bed. We now sleep in a human dog bed. It's for humans, but it's shaped like a dog bed in our living room to avoid triggers that come with being in a bedroom and being in a normal bed. Even before that, we didn't have a bed frame, we just had mattresses to try and limit those triggers. And that has helped tremendously. It's improved our sleep quality a lot, but we still have nightmares and they still impact us. They just impact us less than they used to. And flashbacks, I don't personally experience them, but I front afterwards a fair few times to help soothe the body and to help regulate, are so taxing. And it's so difficult not being able to just stop that from happening because our triggers are so ingrained into our daily life or related to internal feelings or emotions that we can't just avoid. And also, avoiding everything that comes with trauma is also not great. You have to learn how to face it and cope with it and navigate it. And it's incredibly difficult having to live your life being constantly aware that something could trigger you and you end up in a flashback. And there are different types of flashbacks. We'll maybe make another video about this. We don't experience full flashbacks very often, which is where we fully believe ourselves to be in that situation. We feel everything, we hear everything, we see everything, because we have DID. Our memories are fragmented across a lot of us. So oftentimes, if only one alter is triggered into a flashback, they'll only have one sense or the emotions or maybe like a couple of senses, but we're not fully in a flashback, but we're still distressed, we're still in a heightened state, we're still incredibly uncomfortable, or literally terrified and feeling like we are in danger. And because we can't necessarily identify the full memory, we're then unable to navigate why it's different now. Like, if we just get this sense of terror, we don't know what that terror is directed towards. So it's harder to ground ourselves because we don't know what we need to say isn't happening. We can say what is happening. We can go, I'm in the year 2025. I'm holding on to a pink fidget ball that goes blue if I squeeze it. I can describe the things around myself. And part of what I do is helping us ground, so I'm pretty good at that. But if I'm not in front, if someone who doesn't know grounding skills isn't in front, our trauma holders who have a lot of amnesia around them don't have access to those grounding skills. So as much as we can learn them as a system, as much as we can practice them as a system, if the alters that need those coping skills aren't the ones learning those coping skills, they're not going to be able to use them because they have no access to them. Already, when someone who is in a system is in a heightened state, it is harder for them to access their coping skills because they're in a heightened state. When you add amnesia barriers and different alters into that, it becomes impossible sometimes to access those skills. And so you're just stuck, unable to do anything to help yourself because who is fronting in that moment has no way of helping themselves and is just stuck in flashback until someone else in the system can move around them and get into front to start being able to help soothe the body. And it's so distressing, and it means that our treatment, like the course of our treatment, is going to have to take longer because we have to teach multiple people the same skill. And so then that just adds more time and more complexity to our actual therapy process and to ourselves and teaching ourselves. And yes, we can help each other learn, but I have all of these skills and I can only talk to Atlas, and Atlas isn't someone who experiences flashbacks. So that doesn't actually help. I can't just go and talk to a trauma holder and be like, here, these are the skills that you need. I can write them down, I can leave them videos, but I can't go and talk to them internally. I have to wait until we're fronting together, if that happens, because if they're in distress, it's unlikely that I'll be fronting because I'm separated from that. And it makes everything so much harder, and it makes navigating life so much harder. Another thing that we really struggle with is our impulsivity. And we think that this is linked to our ADHD and also probably also DID and stuff like that. But we have a lot of impulsivity, especially around impulsive spending. We have a relatively addictive personality. Like, we know that we can't drink when we're not in a social setting because we'll probably form an addiction to it. We know that we can never touch a cigarette. Like, we get addicted to things, and that then can be disabling, especially when You have like a spending addiction. Like we keep buying squishmallows that we probably don't need. We have more than that what fits on the shelf, and we keep buying them, and we can't stop buying them. They're at our grocery store. We add them to our grocery cart, and most of the time it's the kids adding them to the grocery cart, but we then don't take them out because we want them. We want the stuff. We want the collections, and the collections bring us so much joy, but it also isn't great for our financial situation. Speaking of things that bring us joy, but then are also detrimental, special interests. Special interests are so important to us. Like, we spend most of our time thinking about and conceptualizing the world through the lens of our special interests. We have a few different special interests. Some are specific to different alters, some are collective. Our big ones are the Hunger Games, Minecraft, cats, animals in general, and psychology. And these things mean a lot to us. And it means that we're constantly perceiving the world through that lens. Constantly perceiving everyone around you through the lens of psychology isn't always great, because people don't want to be pathologized all the time. And we try not to do that because it makes people uncomfortable, but we also see little things and we're like, oh, this could be linked to this. And even though we're not necessarily saying that the person displaying those traits has those things, sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. And people don't like it when you psychoanalyze them without them giving you permission. And we've had to learn that the hard way. And it's annoying because we don't want to do that, but that's how we see the world. And we can't not see the world that way. Like, another thing, whenever we're traveling somewhere, whenever we're walking somewhere, whenever we're seeing like a natural environment, all we can think about is how that would look as a Hunger Games arena. And like, we conceptualize what the arena would look like, how the games would be set up, what kind of tributes from which districts would do well in those things, what kind of mutations the game makers might add to it, how big the arena might be. And this is all stuff that we're thinking about. We're not necessarily discussing it with other people, but we're constantly seeing that and thinking about that, and can get very caught up in that. And it's not always beneficial to be thinking of the world around you in the concept of a fictional world, because we already struggle with dissociation and feeling disconnected from reality. And so if we're not being actively present in the moment, if we're not actually going, wow, this is a tree that I'm touching, and instead going, I wonder what this tree would look like in this fictional world, that worsens our dissociation and our disconnect from the environment around us. And whilst the act of imagining those Hunger Games arenas and thinking about them brings us a lot of joy and is really fun to do, it's also not actually that beneficial for us staying present. At the same time, special interest can be the only way that we can regulate ourselves. We were on the bus the other week and got heavily distressed. I don't know if it was flashbacks, if it was meltdowns, I don't know what was going on. Atlas was the one fronting, and he could feel himself getting really, really distressed. And so he whipped out our phone, we had our headphones, and he just watched the same Last Life animatic over and over and over again until the bus ride was done. Watching that video was the only way that I could keep myself regulated in that point in time, and that was by engaging in a special interest, and it worked. But in a situation where I didn't have my phone, my headphones, or data connection, I wouldn't have been able to watch that video, and I would have ended up having a flashback on the bus in front of a bunch of people, and it was a very, very intense flashback. We were managed to ground ourselves and stay regulated so that it didn't actually happen. We only ended up having an emotional flashback rather than a full flashback. But if we have a full flashback on the bus, our full flashbacks can look a couple of different ways, but we can dissociate and just be entirely still and not aware of our surroundings, which means we might miss our stop. We can also have flashbacks where we are reacting to what is happening, which then can disturb the entire bus ride of people that we're with, especially if we are making sounds or if we are moving around in jerky mannerisms. Speaking of buses and being kicked off buses, this is unrelated to flashbacks, but is related to disability. We were having what's called a tic attack. So when you have Tourette's, you have like your baseline level of tics. And then sometimes you can have a tic attack where you have a lot of tics very rapidly, often more complex tics, often more painful tics. So we ended up having a tic attack on the bus on the way home from the city to our house. Luckily, we had friends with us on this bus, because I don't know how we would have advocated for ourselves if we were alone. But we were very loud. We were very disruptive, but it was out of our control. We were trying so hard to suppress these tics, just wait until we got off the bus. But we just had no control over it. And when we were nearly at our stop, the bus driver turned around and was like, hey, you need to get off, or you need to stop, or I don't remember exactly what he said. And our friends were like, they have Tourette's, and I can't remember what his response was, but he still wasn't happy. And luckily we were nearly at our stop, so we did manage to get off. Sorry, talking about tics makes us tick more. Bear with me 2 seconds. But we were unable to prevent ourselves from doing those things. It was outside of our control, but it was still really disruptive to other people, and it meant that we technically faced discrimination, but also was then upsetting to anyone else around us. And like, that was a shit situation to be in. It was outside of our control. We couldn't stop ourselves, and we nearly got kicked off the bus because we couldn't stop ourselves. The same thing happened in high school, the only time we ever had an iced coffee, and we ended up having to take a tack in our math class and getting kicked out of our math class. That teacher did get in trouble afterwards when we explained the situation to the head of year, but it was outside of our control. And as much as we were still at the time trying to tell ourselves that we didn't have Tourette's, we were not the kind of student who would intentionally cause a fuss in class. We ended up with blisters on our fingers because we could not stop clicking them over and over again, to the point that we caused ourselves blisters. We've bruised ourselves, we've bruised our friends. We don't have as violent tics anymore, but we used to have ones where we hit people or slapped people. We've bitten people as a tic before. And that feels so shitty because we don't want to hurt people. And we had no control over our body. As someone who experienced chronic childhood trauma and felt like my autonomy was taken away from me, having a disability like Tourette's, where I'm literally not in control of my body all the time or in control of my words all the time, then also messes with my perception of self and makes me feel shit, because all I want in the world is to be able to feel in control of myself, to be able to feel like myself, to be able to feel like I have autonomy over my choices and my actions and my words, and my body literally takes that away from me. And I can't have that autonomy. And that is horrible. Despite having clear symptoms that impact us every day, the symptoms that impact us every day change. One day our Tourette's might be bad and we might be having a lot of tics or a lot of tic attacks. Another day our c-PTSD might be really, really bad and we're having a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares. Other days our DID might be really bad and we're having a lot of rapid switching, a lot of headaches, a lot of dissociation, a lot of memory loss and amnesia. Another day our autism might be really bad and we're having a lot of sensory issues. It's difficult for us to talk and form words and communicate. We're having meltdowns and shutdowns. Another day our ADHD might be really bad and we cannot sit still. We're constantly needing to fidget. We're picking at our skin. We're pulling at our hair. We're unable to concentrate. We feel like we can't do anything. We can't get any tasks completed. Another day our anxiety might be really bad and we just turn into a bundle of nerves. We can't initiate anything. We are just trembling. Our heart rate is really high. Some days, multiple things might be really bad all at once. The autism might be really playing up. We might be heavily impacted. We can hardly talk. We're having difficulties communicating. And our c-PTSD is playing up and we're having a lot of flashbacks. And so we need help. We need support. But because we can't communicate because of the autism, we're then unable to get assistance and we're just stuck feeling miserable and having flashbacks, and there's nothing anyone can do to help because we're unable to reach out to anyone and ask for help. And then we have days where we feel relatively fine. There's one or two switches, there's low amnesia, there's good communication. We're not having that many tics, our sensory issues aren't that bad, we're able to concentrate. Like, our functioning fluctuates a lot on a day-to-day basis and we don't necessarily know how we're going to wake up feeling. We can kind of predict it. We know if we've done a lot the day before, we're likely to have lower functioning the day after. But some days, even if we've been resting all week, we just wake up with no capacity to do anything. And there's not much we can do about it. Like, we can use our coping skills, we can try and engage in interests to like give us some capacity, but that's not a guarantee. And so it can be really hard to connect with and identify as being disabled when your functioning changes all the time. And it might be fine in the morning and shit in the afternoon. You might have a really tough start to the day, and then there's a switch and someone who's disconnected from everything going on fronts and is able to function and get a bunch of chores done that you've been putting off for months because you've not been able to do it. But that alter who was able to do it might not front often enough, or conversely, the system might not be able to handle alters who can do a lot of tasks fronting frequently because it's too taxing for the physical body. Like, if we have someone who wants to clean the entire house and get the entire house cleaned, that's going to wipe us out for at least a couple of days, if not an entire week. So it's not feasible for them to front every single day, to keep on top of tasks every single day, because our body will literally crash and burn and will not be able to handle it. This video's thumbnail mentions living with hidden disabilities, and a lot of our disabilities are hidden. You don't necessarily see the DID, you don't necessarily see the ADHD or the autism, But if you're looking for it, you will. And technically, Tourette's counts as a visible illness, but people don't always realize it's Tourette's. That bus driver, that high school teacher, they didn't think about that. They just thought that we were acting up or being annoying because we could. They thought it was our own free will. You don't see the process of me being unable to choose what I'm doing with my body. You don't see the process of us switching. Most of the time, people don't even see our flashbacks because we internalize them, or because we're so dissociated from the fact they're occurring. We can feel really terrible, and there can be an alter co-fronting in a flashback and someone else fronting and continuing a conversation. They might seem kind of distracted or a little bit out of it. Other times, our disability is really visible. We're unable to talk. We're unable to make eye contact. We're unable to move properly. We're really sluggish. Or like there's things that are visible but are less seen as visible, like the way that we're constantly fidgeting, we're constantly moving. The way that we structure some of our sentences sometimes, the amount of echolalia that we have, the way that we're constantly needing to wear headphones when we're in public spaces. There's a lot of things that if you know what autism looks like, if you know what dissociation looks like, you'll be able to spot. But also we can mask that, at least some of us can. And so we do a really good job of just not showing anything. Like I could put this fidget down, I could hold my hands in my lap, and I could just talk to the camera. I could describe all of this. But that's not authentic to who I am. And it takes a lot more effort for me to stay still, to focus on making eye contact, to communicate my point. I'm going to be able to more effectively communicate my point if I'm fidgeting, if I'm not looking directly at the camera, if I'm allowing my body to move in a way that is natural to it. And so stimming is really, really helpful in us being able to stay on task and stay focused. But stimming can also be harmful. As much as it helps us regulate, as much as it helps us concentrate, we can have really harmful stims. We have our body-focused repetitive behaviors, so our skin picking, our hair pulling, our nail biting, all of this kind of stuff. We also have habits of hitting ourselves. Like we will just hit our head if we're in a meltdown, either against a wall or against our hands. We'll hit our legs, or we used to have a stim where we'd do this and end up with bruises on our wrists. And we wouldn't be able to stop ourselves because our body just, like it was stimming. It wasn't a tick, but we needed to do that. Like we needed to do that to be able to regulate, and we couldn't stop it. And it took us a long time to be able to come up with stims like that we could do instead of something that was harmful. And speaking of stuff that's harmful to the body, there would have probably already been a trigger warning on the screen, but this is a verbal trigger warning that I'm going to talk about more in-depth mental health things and crises and suicidality and self-harm. Not in graphic detail of what that entails, but I am going to discuss those topics. At the end of the day, we still struggle with chronic suicidality. Like there is not a day in our life where we at least don't consider it in fleeting. We don't really think about it seriously that frequently anymore, but we've had numerous suicide attempts. And that is related to mental health and also disability. And it's also disabling to want to die all the time because it makes it really hard to have any sort of future thinking. There are alters in our system who experience much stronger suicidal ideation than others. There are alters whose only defensive mechanism is to threaten suicide. And so every time we try and build a connection with them in the system, they tell us to go kill ourselves because they don't want to be touched. I don't mean physically touched. I mean touched as in building a communication between them. They don't want us to go anywhere near them. They don't want us to even look at them or consider them or think about them. So when we do, they then throw threats at us because that is their protection. They're like, if you talk to me, I'll kill us. And it's like, okay, now I don't want to talk to you because I don't want to die right now. And that's really distressing, and it makes life really complicated because not only are you trying to build communication so that you're functioning better, you're also trying to respect each individual's autism boundaries. And sometimes that is, don't come near me. So you can't go near them. But at the same time, you need to be showing them that you are someone safe and that they are able to come to you when they're ready. And it's just really complicated and it just gets really messy. And then there's self-harm. We've struggled with self-harm for a very long time. We had atypical self-harm since we were a young child, and we had more typical things of self-harm that you'd think of since we were a teenager. And that is something that we still struggle with. Like, we are relatively good at managing those urges, but also since we started engaging in specific habits, we haven't been clean for longer than 3 months, for over 6 years. And we try really hard, and oftentimes it's just a small slip up, a small lapse. But it's hard to just call it a lapse when that's a repetitive cycle of every month or every 3 months or every couple of weeks this behavior is engaged in. And that self-harm occurs for a variety of reasons. Part of it's because it's addictive. Part of it's because it's the only coping skill some alters have. And part of it's because different alters view the system or the body as something that doesn't have value or that deserves to be punished. And whilst all of that is, again, more linked to mental health rather than disability, it's still something that impacts all of us on a day-to-day basis that is outside of the typical realm of experiences, although it's common for a lot of people still, and impacts us and impacts the way we navigate life and impacts the way that we view ourselves. And it's something that we have to deal with every single day. We're not necessarily engaging in those behaviors every day, but those urges are coming up every single day and we have to navigate life with them. This video could have been a lot more structured, but we just wanted to sit down and talk about it, just kind of word vomit to the camera, because there's a lot that goes into being disabled. And there's a lot that goes into feeling comfortable enough to identify as being disabled. The step one is recognizing that these things impact you and that they impact you more than a typical person is impacted. And that's really hard, especially when you've been raised believing that all these things are normal, or believing that you're just making it up, or believing that you're lying, or being told that you're lying, or being told that you're just being dramatic. And so when you've been told all of these things, it's then really hard to recognize that no, you actually are struggling and deserving of support and needing accommodations. There's then the element of feeling like if you're not working, if you're not studying, you're not contributing. That feeling really sucks. But it's not true. You can contribute so much just by existing. You can contribute so much just by talking to people or by creating something for yourself. And at the end of the day, you don't need to contribute to deserve to exist. You deserve to exist simply because you're alive, and that gives you a right to exist. And then there's grappling with the fact that not all disabilities look the same, and comparing yourself to others and going, but I can talk a lot of the time, so I can't be disabled, or I can walk around fine most of the time, so I can't be disabled. Or I have the ability to learn things, so I can't be disabled. Or all of these things that you're like, but this person is more disabled than me. And that might be true. There's probably going to be someone who is more disabled than you. But that doesn't mean that you're not disabled. It doesn't mean that your disabilities don't have impact on your life and that you're undeserving of that support and accommodation and self-acceptance. And being disabled is hard. It's difficult. You do experience bigotry and marginalization and ableism based on being disabled, whether that is intentional or accidental. You're probably going to end up having a more expensive life because you need to pay for more things. You need to pay for like assistive technology or specific therapies or specific specialists. You might not be able to do things like go to the supermarkets. You need to pay more to get it delivered. There are all these things that just add and add and add to the expenses of being disabled. So it can be hard to accept that you're disabled because you don't want to acknowledge that your life is going to be fundamentally harder than if you weren't. But as much as it's difficult to accept, and as much as we didn't want to accept that we were disabled, we were. The fact of the matter was, we were. And there was nothing that we could do that would change the fact that we were disabled. And now we're finally feeling confident in that label in 2025. We got more comfortable with it last year, especially after we had tried to attend uni and found that we couldn't without more supports, and realized that we were a lot more impacted than we initially thought we were. Because when we're just by ourselves in our house, when our only responsibilities are to take care of ourselves and to take care of our cats, we can manage that pretty well. We still struggle, we're still deeply impacted, but we can do it. But the minute we add another responsibility onto that, like studying or working, everything goes out the window. Everything becomes so much harder. And so we had to step back. We had to organize more supports. We had to work more to get more skills and to get more confidence and to get more familiarity so that like we could develop routines. That really was a slap in the face of, oh, I really do struggle. I have been struggling to wrap up this video because I don't know how to put it concisely. So I'm just going to say it really bluntly. It can be hard to accept that you're disabled. It can be hard to accept that you're different to other people. And it can be hard to accept that you struggle more than other people, or even struggle more than you thought you did. Because at least with us, with our amnesia, we struggle more than we think we do because we forget how much we struggle, which makes it even harder to communicate things and to accept things because we forget. We forget how much it impacts us. And this is exactly why I keep struggling to finalize this video, because I keep coming up with more things to add. But I've already rambled long enough, so I am going to close it here. And thank you everyone for bearing with us through this very chaotic, very this thought video. We collectively as a system are disabled. Some days are easier than others. Some alters have it easier than others. But at the end of the day, we are all disabled. We navigate the world as a disabled person. And that's okay. It's hard, but it's okay. The wind and rain is picking up again now, so I really do have to close this off and stop rambling. But thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.